So much of it just made me feel candidly a little depressed because we just somehow still have the same problems as an industry that it felt like we had 15 years ago.
We have literally Star Wars technology for individual patients, but we still sort of have this Fred Flintstone healthcare delivery system.
It's crazy to me that the bill still arrives weeks later and it takes providers weeks to get paid. So just like basic stuff that in like financial services, we've been doing this stuff for years. We still don't do it in healthcare.
We had every EHR, I think, that has ever been created. That's really one of the core foundational problems when you think about broader scale adoption of AI in care delivery.
It's hard to get somebody to do something when their salary depends upon them not doing it. It's not the technology. We have enough technology. We just don't have the right incentives.
Hi there, I'm Christina Farr, and this is Second Opinion, the podcast that cuts through the noise in digital health to deliver what you actually need to know. We're tackling the topics that matter with brutal honesty and depth through conversations you won't find elsewhere. No talking points, no hype, just clear insights to help you navigate what's really happening at the intersection of health, technology, and biology. Let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome back to the Second Opinion podcast. We have such an amazing episode up ahead and two very special guests who are longtime friends of mine and also have been in the industry now for decades, spanning both health and technology. Steve Klasko is here, former CEO of Jefferson Health. He's now an executive at residence in General Catalyst, the giant VC firm, and he sits on the board of a company called .go, which he was just sharing with me. He'll tell you more about it. And then we've got Jessie Beegle, who's an advisor to health and tech companies. She's been involved with so many of the big players that have moved from the tech side of the house and into healthcare. She's been involved with health systems, teaching them how to really get up to speed with modern technologies. We'll talk about all of that as well. And the two of them are writing a book. Yay! So we're going to hear more about just the topic of the book and when it's coming out. And also just like commiserate with each other a little bit on how hard it is to write books, having just finished one myself. So welcome, Steve. Welcome, Jessie. Thanks for joining.
It's so great to be with you, Chrissy. It's been a few years since we got together, and a lot has changed and not much has changed in different ways.
I sometimes feel that way. Actually, that was going to be my first question to you guys because I just got back from this conference. It's called SAIL, and you should both definitely come next year. It's a academic health and AI conference in Puerto Rico, of all places. But it felt like, as I was there, we were talking about the future of healthcare, we were talking about AI, but so much of it just made me feel candidly a little depressed because we just somehow still have the same problems as an industry that it felt like we had 15 years ago. So we're still up there on stage talking about challenges with like basic stuff like API integrations with electronic health records and challenges with data being held in silos. And I'm like, oh my God, how many times do we have to have the same discussions and nothing changes? So how are you two feeling in just like the year 2025? Like how much progress have we really made, guys?
Well, I'll start. I think you're right. It's amazing because I'm an obstetrician and we have literally Star Wars technology for individual patients, but we still sort of have this Fred Flintstone healthcare delivery system. And I'm a lot older than both of you, and I've been a healthcare leader for 40 years. And I like to use this quote from Jason Kidd when he went to the Dallas Mavericks. They were 24 and 52. He said, "I'm going to turn this team around 360 degrees." Sometimes when I go to these conferences, I feel like we've turned this around 360 degrees. So I think that's what hasn't changed. You're right. We're still talking about the same interoperability issues, et cetera. We're still talking about the fact that we spent 40 years telling frontline providers that technology would make their life easier, starting with the epidemic, and it hasn't. But on the positive side, I think that some of the things that Jessie did when she was at Amazon and LifePoint and some of the things that we're doing at GC and .go, we're actually starting to say, what's a huge problem? And let's look at how we can have AI and technology solve it in things like autism and things like eating disorders in clinical trials. So I think that we're actually starting to get at some of those very, very difficult things and saying, let's not try to boil the ocean, but let's actually solve some real problems.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Steve. I think from my perspective, one of the things, Chrissy, I know you've seen this over your career as well, that I really think we're at an inflection point now is I think the ecosystem is starting to gel a bit more. right? You've got your large tech companies that are really leaning into the lanes where they're uniquely suited. You've got your health systems that have on the ground expertise. And what I've seen firsthand, I know Steve has as well, is really those two worlds coming together. And I think that's really one of the things that really was the driving force between us coming together to think about writing this book, which is how do you translate between what's going on the front lines with an OpenAI or an AWS, with what's going on in Paris, Texas, in a rural healthcare delivery system. And how do you bring those two worlds together and actually translate so they can actually speak the same language and really get to the problems at hand, where we've got wonderful technology on one hand and we have a ton of problems on the other hand. And there shouldn't be a reason why these two worlds are not coming together. And that's really the role that Steve and I have played throughout our career. And we're really excited to share some of those learnings through the book.
Yeah. So, some of this it feels like the problems themselves are so much related to the technology that the healthcare system is already using. Just the kind of general feeling of continued dissatisfaction with the electronic health records, I think, was very apparent amongst the health systems that I really kind of heard over and over again at this conference and here all the time. And it's not just that software, it's really the whole gamut. I mean, just, we talked about all the basic stuff that in other industries is just absolutely table stakes that we can't do yet in healthcare, like getting paid at the point of a procedure or service happening, and even knowing how much money you're going to get paid as that is happening. I mean, it's crazy to me that the bill still arrives weeks later and it takes providers weeks to get paid. So just like basic stuff that in like financial services and other areas is, we've been doing this stuff for years. We still don't do it in healthcare. So tell me like a little bit more like tactically, like how you see this changing, because we can say all day long, like we need to bring these worlds together. And I agree with you that we do. But like when the tech guys come in, the issue isn't that the health systems don't want to change. It's the issue is they're stuck with a lot of stuff and they can't get rid of it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I couldn't agree with you more on that piece, Christine. I think it really does come down to how do you have the proper foundation of the house in order to bring in all of these wonderful things that we're seeing in the AI world. And so thinking about disparate EHR systems, like certain systems are on one single EHR and that's wonderful for them. But, the system that I was at, we had every EHR, I think, that has ever been created. I used to call us the New York City of health IT. And so when you think about putting modern endpoints across a broader enterprise to be able to organize data and liberate it so you can actually utilize it and use some of these new solutions, that's really one of the core foundational problems, I think, when you think about broader scale adoption of AI in care delivery. And I do a lot of work with a system, Mercy out of St. Louis, who has actually organized our entire system on a single instance of EHR. But even more so, they've invested in cloud. They have invested in data cleansing and data governance. And that's just something I think is very rare for health systems to be on the bleeding edge of. And so that system in particular is starting to really see uptick with adoption of solutions because they have been investing for 5+ years to say, how do we get the proper infrastructure and foundation for our house? So now we can really take advantage of what's coming with the AI revolution.
And I think, look, from where I sat running a $10 billion academic medical center, the problem becomes it's hard to get somebody to do something when their salary depends upon them not doing it. And I remember, it's not the technology. We have enough technology. We just don't have the right incentives. And I think that literally what I found was, I remember when I first got into Jefferson and I partnered with Heyman, we wrote the book on healthcare. And the concept was, what if a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and a CEO of an academic medical center had a baby? How would we take those two cultures together? And I'll just give you one quick example. I had my chief growth officer tell me if I spent $2 million in commercials and other traditional marketing, I could get a 0.5% market share from Penn. That was agenda item number 1. Agenda item number 5 was Dan Goldsmith, who was the GC guy that sat on my cabinet because we had that Silicon Valley entrepreneur and CEO of Academic Medical Center baby. So we did a survey, and 18% of people that want to get an appointment at Jefferson can't get one because, they either wait too long or the phone, it was just ridiculous. So I realized, wait, you want me to spend $2 million in commercials so I can get people from Penn want to go to Jefferson, get frustrated that they can't get an appointment. Now that's even just all internal. And then you get into the fact that literally, I have companies that can certify doctors with insurers within 2 days instead of 6 weeks. But is it in the payer's best short-term interest to keep the money for 6 weeks and not get them certified in 2 days? So until we start to really align those incentives, the good news is that technology is now happening where all that can happen. And I think where GC is excited about the Summa acquisition is if we can take everything we said in Unhealthcare Manifesto for Health Assurance, and everybody say, yeah, that's nice, but it'll never happen, and actually now own an IDN in a place like Akron, Ohio, and show that we actually can do it if all the incentives are aligned, then we can start to figure out how we can do it in areas where there's disparate incentives.
I think that's a really good point. And I love what you said about, it's generally not going to happen if everybody's getting paid for it not to. And that's just so much of our problem in healthcare is there are people who want to innovate, but just incentives, not as we've spoken about this so many times, but it is just nothing is aligned correctly. So I do want to touch on AI, and you mentioned it as really something that you both are excited about, and it seems like a lot of folks think that it's really well suited and well positioned to do something big in healthcare. Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the conversation after a word from our sponsors. Today, I'm excited to share a true scientific breakthrough for your long-term health. C15, the first essential fatty acid discovered in 90 years, and it's 3 times better, broader, and safer than omega-3. Dr. Stephanie Van Watson discovered C15 while working with the US Navy to improve the health of aging dolphins. Here's why this matters. Many of us are deficient in C15, resulting in weaker cells that make less energy and quit working earlier than they should. This makes us age faster, sleep poorly, and feel sluggish. C15 is a science-backed, vegan-friendly supplement with pure C15 as its only ingredient. It strengthens your cells, improves mitochondrial function, and protects against damaging free radicals, supporting better metabolic, heart, and liver health, plus deeper sleep and healthier hair, skin, and nails. Unlike fish oil supplements that often go bad, Fatty 15 naturally protects against oxidation. It even comes in a beautiful reusable glass and bamboo jar with eco-friendly refills. Ready to restore your long-term health? Get 15% off your 90-day subscription starter kit at fatty15.com/secondopinion using code secondopinion at checkout. I would love to hear from you both, not just the bull case, because I think we've all heard the bull case a million times, but what's the bear case? Or maybe give me both. You could choose to take one or the other. Maybe Jessie, you go bear, Steve, you go bull, the other way around. But who wants to volunteer to go first?
Well, I'll start. Look, I think, and I'll give an example of both. There's a non-GC company called Neuroflow that literally looks at the mental health crisis. There's another one called Ellipsis that looks at the mental health crisis. Both of them are using AI to predict who's going to get worse in depression and anxiety. And we did a study with one of them where 45% of people who have committed suicide saw their primary care doc within the last 2 to 3 months. So we have failed in mental health, and the ability to use voice biomarker technology or predictive analytics and AI to literally predict who those people might be and then get them an immediate intervention is amazing. The example in clinical trials, a company Paradigm that I'm on the board of with Ken Frazier, which is a GC company, is literally taking clinical trial, not just matching, but allowing rural health systems to get phase 1B clinical trials because their doctors are fine. They just don't have the infrastructure. So literally saving pharma $1 billion and getting more patients enrolled in a cancer clinical trial. Karen Knudsen, the former CEO of the ACS, is on the board. Those are 2 examples of real problems that get solved with AI. The whole other example, though, is literally the just 280 booths in HLTH or Vive around, AI making you more efficient, and we're the only company that does X, and you're not the only company that does X, and so much of it getting commoditized. And the frontline physicians and nurses saying, hey, you know what? This is just your new little gimmick of technology that is just going to make it harder for us. And I think that's really what we have to overcome.
Yeah, no, those are great. I think on the positive side, from my perspective, some of the examples that I've seen are, again, kind of going back to making data actionable. So our clinicians and our care teams across the board can actually do their job better and more informed and in a more proactive manner. So when I was at LifePoint, we partnered with Palantir, and that was a really interesting, my two worlds kind of merging together. But one of the solutions that we were able to deploy was actually looking at OR optimization. And so the first month that we went live, we were able to organize all these different data points that had been sitting in silos for the longest time and were not at the fingertips of our teams across the board on the ground. And we added 100 net new surgeries in a month in one facility. And I remember the teams being like, how did you do that? And it was just such a wonderful example of saying, if we have the right technology team sitting with the right users and understanding how to design for that user to surface data in a way in which they could make a better decision and really better serve the patients, better serve the physicians, as well as improve the margins and revenue for the system, that was just a win from every angle. And so that was a really amazing example of where AI can really solve that bespoke problem on the ground. I agree with Steve. If you go to these conferences, and I think we've all stopped going to some of these conferences, it's just point solution after point solution after point solution. And it's just something that's incremental in nature. And there is a rock and a hard place, especially if you're a startup. You have to find your wedge in and then land and expand. But I think one of the things that we're really starting to see is consolidation in the market. And I'm excited to see how some of these companies are going to start to roll up over the next 18 months to bring together these broader platform type solutions that you can bring at scale to these larger systems to solve these problems on the ground.
Yeah, and Chris, if I could just add, I think it's going to take us a few years. It took us about 50 years to get doctors and nurses to work together. We literally had these centers for interprofessional education. We now are going to have to get doctors and AI robots to work together. And I just look at, I was chair of an advisory board for IBM Watson. IBM Watson was going to take over radiologists. Radiologists, we don't need any. Well, that got sold for parts. I'm now involved with a GC company, AI Doc, which says, hey, radiologists are really good, but they're 96% right. We're going to help the other 4%. I had an undercover boss moment. I had a 1.5 centimeter solid mass in my right middle lobe, and they're about to do a big surgery. And AI Doc literally looked at a CAT scan I had about 7 or 8 years ago in my abdomen and said, hey, that same mass was there. Nobody looked at the lung because, it was an abdominal CAT scan. Radiologist, maybe you should look at that and see if that changes the diagnosis. So that's where I think we're starting to feel more comfortable, where radiologists love AI Doc. When we first came in, they said, hey, I don't want AI to take me over. Now they're saying, this is a great tool. And by the way, I'm teaching AI Doc where to get better. And AI Doc is helping me in the few cases that maybe I missed something.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And one of the things I have many both bull and bear cases for AI in healthcare as well. And at some point we'll kind of grab a drink and talk about it more. But to your point about now we got to see physicians and nurses starting to engage with the AI version of themselves on the ground. How does that go, especially with the problem of ego, which I think is very much still the case for a lot of physicians, that, it's not possible that all of them are graduated in the top of their class and are the best of the best, but they, for the most part seem to think that they are. So what's the psychology? Let's get into the human psychology of how we convince some of these folks to start using these tools, especially when you see all the tech guys in the room, making the case that they're ultimately going to be replaced by these tools.
Yeah, boy, that's really a great question. And, I'm seeing it with, I work with Hippocratic AI at GC. And even over the last 6 months, that's gotten so much better. And, we have these kind of things, it's Rachel, the AI nurse, right? And, we have people in some of our pilots where they're coming to the office saying, hey, I'd rather see Rachel. She's so much nicer than the nurses in your office. So I think what has to happen is it takes a lot of dialogue. And in the places that with the conversational AI companies that I work with, Ellipsis and Hippocratic, I've talked to nurses. I said, look, and doctors, you have said for the last 5 to 10 years that you're burnt out, because you're not doing what you went to medical school for. And the medical school stuff is, or the nursing school stuff is, how do I interact with folks? And, how do I give them what they need from a humanics point of view that the robot will never be able to do? So don't complain that now the AI can do some of the things that you were complaining that you had to do before. Now, one of the things that I'm spending a lot of time, Chrissy, is it totally changes the kind of medical students that we have to pick. We still accept students based on science, GPA, MedCats, and organic chemistry grades. And somehow we're amazed that doctors aren't more empathetic, communicative, and creative. So ideally, when I deliver a baby, there's going to be a robot next to me that's going to be better than any human on the planet that can look at that baby and saying what's chromosomally wrong with him or her. But when the mom says, "Doctor, what does this mean?" and we still have doctors saying, well, it's the 21st chromosome or these medical complications. That's not what she means. She means, what does it mean to my image of a perfect baby? And the robot will never be able to do that. So I go on the road and talk to doctors and nurses all the time about, let's look at, before you go through the Armageddon of these guys are going to go after my job, let's look at the things that you're concerned about. We have a company that started at Jefferson that we sold to GC that's using AI to make nurses safer. Nobody argues that that's better than it was 5 years ago. So if you start to look and say, no, this is not Epic, this is not EMRs getting forced on you, this is how can we use AI to make your life easier and give us a little bit of trust and then verify, I think that's starting to work.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think it really comes down to a framing position, Chrissy, when you're introducing these new tools, whether it be AI or other tools to clinicians on the ground, is really focusing on this is not coming in and sprinkling AI and we're going to solve all of your problems because you guys couldn't figure out healthcare for the past 100 years. This is a modern tool that is really good at certain aspects. And given the problem set that has been described and has risen to the top of the organization, these are how these tools can actually help allow you to do your job and do your job at the top of your license, as Steve said, but really take away a lot of the pieces that you don't want to do. You didn't go to medical school or you didn't go to nursing school to be an overpaid typist, right? These tools can really be something that help augment your workload and allow those caregivers to give back more of their time and spend more time with their patients and the reasons that they went to medical school or to nursing school. And I think that really setting that stage and having a bit of humility and having come from the ivory tower of tech, right? That was something that we always got pushback on was, that's great. You're in a silo in a lab somewhere solving these really hard problems, but on the ground, these are the issues that nurses are facing day in and day out. When you go walk the halls of a hospital, sure, technology can solve certain problems, but nurses are doing workarounds on post-it notes because he or she is really just trying to get back to their patient and get through their workload. And so I think having that empathy from the large tech organizations to really say, we have a fascinating tool, but we need to know where to apply it and where to point the ship is really the transition that I'm starting to see. And that's why I'm so excited about what the future holds. But it does come down to tech is not smarter than healthcare delivery folks and vice versa. And really, how can the two worlds work together? But it comes with that bit of hat in hand, I think, on both sides to say we have really massive problems in healthcare in the US and we can start to solve them. But we have to kind of, take our hat off a little bit to say, here is where we are well suited. And this is why we think we can help support. And to Steve's point, trust is imperative, right? That has to be the first thing to win folks over. But I do think that from what I've seen firsthand, if you're solving a real problem, people do start to trust you. And they say, well, could we go a couple steps further? And what else could we do when we start to get an unlock with some of these new AI technologies?
And Chrissy, you brought up really the operative point about how do we get the humans to either understand this or at least give us feedback. And, when I graduated from Wharton, I got a grant to look at what makes doctors different than, depending on the audience, either other people or normal people and how we handle change. And one of the things we found in a typical medical staff, 20% of the docs get it, 15% of the docs will never get it, and then there's the 65% in the middle. And we found as leaders, we spend a lot of time with the people that get it because they like us, we like them. We spend a lot of time with the people who never get it because they're loud and we feel we can cure anybody, and we leave out the people in the middle. So what we did at Jefferson with what was called JOLT, Jefferson Onboarding and Leadership Transformation, we taught the teachers, the people that get it, so I spent less time with them. I ignored the folks that'll never get it. We called that administrative hospice. We just let them hopefully be comfortable and then go off to a competitor. And we concentrated on that 65% in the middle. And we published this for Sloan, about a 325% increase over 10 years of those 50 or 60 docs a year that had gone through Jolt in the willingness to accept things like AI and changes. So some of that is just don't give up and say, oh, doctors don't get it or nurses don't get it, but spend money in your health system, or if you're a startup, give them those resources to have the docs and nurses get what they need to get, which is partly where our new book comes from, which we're coming from different planets. The 28-year-old Stanford dropouts in Silicon Valley think they can solve everything, versus the academic medical center or rural center CEOs that literally went through a medical look to the left of you, look to the right of you, one of you will get in type training. They're two different planets.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that segmentation is really important, especially in the context of these technologies that can be really expensive and selling into health systems. Not everybody is going to use them. And that's something that we don't talk about enough. But taking a step back, you both really understand the health system context. And I think to a lot of folks in startup and entrepreneurship, it's very mysterious. But, the time that I'm spending now with systems, I mean, what I keep hearing over and over again is, look, we have very thin margins. We're often in the red. And look at these tech companies. They have some of them are SaaS companies, software companies. They have 80% plus margins. What's that about? And I see this sort of increasing resentment and also just lack of understanding maybe between the two sides. If you're a health system in the red, you're not in a position to buy something just because it makes something work a little bit better. You really have to have it solve what you believe to be as a critical need, which is oftentimes related to revenue. And I just wonder how much we see some of these AI tools really solving for that, because it's not really about revenue or cost savings for most of them. For what I see, it's usually more like satisfaction metrics. So I'm curious for your thoughts there on just are we really meeting the mark when it comes to selling to health systems today? Just knowing what they're all going through, or many of them are going through.
I think we're not. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you really hit the nail on the head. So I look at everything as BC, DC, and KAC, before COVID, during COVID, and kind of after COVID, which is where we're in now. And it is ridiculous to go to a health system CEO and say, I've got this great company that's going to get you ready for a future of value-based care. Because so far that's been a myth. And as one CEO put it to me, it's like, that's great, Steve. But let me explain something. I lost $200 million last year. I'm having a heart attack, and you're like my dermatologist telling me you can move my liposuction up till next week for something that would be good for me. Bring in the interventional cardiologist first. So I tell every one of the companies I work with, to your point, unless whatever you're doing, it's got to be non-commoditized, and it's got to be able to have within the next 12 months a real impact on the CEO around total cost of care, measurable access or quality, or user experience is actually going to make a difference in margin, because so many of the things that they bought before literally didn't do any of those things. So I think more and more CEOs are getting that. And I think, as Jessie brought out, the other thing we hear all the time is we're tired of having to put all the Lego pieces together of all the point solutions that you guys have created. I mean, I'm on the board or an advisor to 3 or 4 amazing women's health companies that are bringing things like fertility and menopause, a company called Uva or a company called Ebby around bacterial vaginosis and some other things. But the CEOs say, I understand founder egos and I understand cap tables, but you're asking me to buy something. Why can't you put those things together so I have one horizontal company? I think at GC, that's what we're trying to do. And then the last thing is health system CEOs have to diversify their portfolio. So at Jefferson, if I thought something was good enough for my 18 hospitals, and that's sort of where I first met GC, I said, okay, I'm not just going to be a vendee. I want to be able to co-develop with you and gain equity. And there's a group of 15 health systems now through something called the Alliance, which is led by folks that run Avia, that are basically starting to do that. Entities like Christiana and MedStar, actually at Health Evolution, we brought that up. So I think you're starting to see that piece of health systems saying, all right, I get it. This is a great company. and you need me. So I want to be able to share in that $30 billion of revenue that's going to be out there.
Yep. I love the point about point solutions as well. All right, guys, we are running low on time, so we got to get into the new book. Tell us about it. How did you guys end up deciding to write a book? Because I know that, Steve, this is not your first book. So what's made you want to go back and do another one? And then what are the details? Like, when's it coming out?
Well, Jessie, why don't you start on why you wanted to work with me on this, and I'll go into the concept a little bit.
Yeah, perfect. So Steve and I have known each other for a long time, and we've had many conversations about sort of sitting in the ivory tower of tech and then sort of on the front lines of care delivery. And we just always came back, Chrissy, to having both of those experiences had really shaped and given us, I think, both empathy and humility on both sides of the aisle. And with a number of the organizations that we advise, really helping to share that, because we want to bring the best of technology to the problems at hand on the ground in care delivery. And we just wanted to get that message out and sort of have folks learn from what we have seen in sort of on the front lines on both sides. And, at JP Morgan this year, we sat down and Steve said, "Hey, Jess, I think we should finally put our thoughts on paper and we should write this book together." And it's always been a dream of mine to write a book. And I'm excited every time I sit down with Steve, I learn something. And I think the readers will just get so much from his experience, as well as I'm really excited to share my experience as well.
Yeah, and for me, this is my 7th book, but incredibly excited about this one for 2 reasons. One, working with Jessie, but so unlike you two, I never got to sit at the cool kids table, right? I was stuck by myself, reading science fiction books. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was one of my favorite books. And the concept behind Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was that this guy was about to have, in the UK, was about to have his house bulldozed down. And it was based on a administrative mistake that they were building a super highway. And he goes to a bar and he ends up sitting next to an alien from another planet in a galaxy. And he's telling the story. He goes, "Well, that's interesting because we're about to build a super galactic highway and we've decided that Earth is in the way. So your plan's about to get blown up in the next 15 seconds, but you seem pretty cool. So I'm going to transport you up." And, so now all of a sudden this guy is in a different galaxy in a spaceship, and he gives him the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the first chapter is just 2 words: don't panic. Our first chapter will be 2 words: don't panic. And our concept will be that, Jessie, that came from the unlimited money, brilliant, AWS, Google world, and then had to go to LifePoint and deal with for-profit healthcare, but, large health system. And now is, talking to academic medical centers, et cetera. I grew up as a practicing doc, became a dean of 3 different medical schools in totally academic environments, and then got transported to Silicon Valley. And, you think, boy, those people must really have all the answers, and they don't. And the people that come and come to Jefferson say, "You guys must really have all the answers," and we don't. And I think so many of the books that are written are from a singular point of view. "Hi, I'm, whoever I am, I come from Amazon and I've got it figured out." No, you don't. So I think what our goal is to basically, from people that have come from different sides of the galaxy, literally do what you do in your podcast so well. What's the good, bad, and ugly, and what's a solution that might make a difference? The video for the book, I come back as a hologram because I'm now the Chief Digital Health Officer for President Taylor Swift in 2035. And our healthcare motto in 2035, because the Swifties have become a political party, and we could do worse, is make it tailored to the individual.
I would prefer that over other options. I'll leave it there.
Well, I used to say we could do worse, and now I can say we did. But our healthcare motto is make it tailored to the individual, make it swift. So what happened in between 2025 and 2035 to make healthcare tailored and swift? And what part of that was the technology world, that part of the galaxy? What part of it was the human world of we changed? And what part of it was that we decided we have to stop fighting each other? So a classic example was, what would be a real solution around the payer provider dilemma of, I did a panel for a Consumer Electronics Show with somebody from the AMA, somebody from AHIP, both arguing with each other of how AI was being used for pre-auths. There's no question that technology exists to make that easy. There's no question that technology exists to make that less painful for patients and payers and providers. And post the murder of Mr. Thompson, I think we have an opportunity to do that. So that's the book that we're writing. Where's the technology? Where's the humans? How do we get those humans and robots together? What did Amazon know and not know? What did Jefferson know and not know? And what does the next 3 years look like?
Okay, so in our last minute or two, I'm going to give you guys a very quick round, as we do at the end of every pod, of underhyped, just hyped enough, and overhyped. And you don't have to give us an explanation. You can just say underhyped, just hyped enough. Or if you want to add a little sentence or two, please feel free to do so. So I'm gonna grill you both. All works for everybody?
Great.
Okay. Telemedicine.
Overhyped.
Over.
ICRA.
Under.
Yeah, under.
Ambient scribes using AI.
Just enough.
Over.
Ooh, very interesting.
I think, the things that Bridge and Kamura have done have actually, started to make folks' lives easier. So I think for me, it's just enough.
I agree with that, Steve. I think the reason I said over is I'm excited to see how they continue to land and expand to build broader platforms.
RPM and CCM.
Way, way over.
Over.
Women's health.
Under. Way, way under.
100% under.
Well, let me think if I have one more that might stump you guys.
How about conversational AI? You want to do that one?
Ooh, yeah, conversational AI. Let's do it.
Both under and over. I think we're in its infancy, and I'm really bullish on it. But I think there will be some ones that make it and ones that don't.
Jessie?
But everything's an agent. That's the hot word these days. But I agree with Steve. I think that you're going to get a couple breakouts with some of the solutions that I've seen lately. So I'm very excited for the world to kind of see.
Oh, I got one more. Revenue cycle management.
Way over. I mean, just from the point of view, again, that will turn into Teladoc and American Well as far as, being commoditized.
Overhyped, but I think you're going to see a lot of acquisitions and roll-ups in the space in the next 12 months.
Med device, and then I'll let you go.
Well, I'm the chair of the board of a medical device company, so I need to be careful of that. I think it's probably just right in that the medical devices that we use for individual patients are pretty amazing. I think we need to have the medical device companies. So the company that I'm chair of the board of, Teleflex, we own Standard Bariatrics, which is the main thing used in bariatric surgery. What we need is to figure out how we have honest brokers to determine who should have bariatric surgery and who should have GLP-1s. So, how the medical device companies don't just sell devices, but start to solve problems, I think will be an important piece.
Yeah, I would say it's just right.
Amazing. Okay, guys, thank you so much for this conversation with the Second Opinion podcast. If folks want to reach out to you, want to buy the book, what's the best way to reach you?
I'm just sklasko@generalcatalyst.com.
Jessie.beagle@gmail.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the pod.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jessie.
Thank you for tuning in to Second Opinion. If you got value out of this conversation, please share it with colleagues and Slack groups and friends navigating the industry. If you haven't already checked out the Second Opinion newsletter, you will get a link to subscribe in the episode description. Second Opinion is a part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Econ 102 with Noah Smith, Turpentine VC, Complex Systems with Patrick McKenzie, and more shows for experts by experts in tech.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at eric@turpentine.co. That's ERIK @turpentine.co, and let's partner together.